Mic check 1 2. What it do? Welcome back to the Mic Check podcast. This is T Word, the People's Champ. Today we're talking about trainer Derrick James, formerly trainer of the year in 2022, coming off of two pretty heartbreaking losses for his stable in 2023 and some of the biggest fights of his championship level fighters' careers. Before we get into the video, don't forget to like, hit the subscribe button, go ahead and comment after the video, and comment on other videos after you get a chance to watch. Let us know what you think about the channel, you know what I mean? All right, so let's get right into it. Derrick James, he has a pretty deep stable of championship level fighters and high level contender fighters, including Errol Spence Jr., Jermell Charlo, Anthony Joshua, Ryan Garcia, and Frank Martin. Now he's also trained some other fighters along the way. He's got a guy by the name of Burley coming out of Texas who's in the stable, and then he's also worked with Marcus Brown as a second. So let's talk about his record over the last few years without getting too far into the specifics, because I have something very particular I want to mention in this particular video. He picked up Jermell Charlo around 2015, and he's been working with Errol Spence basically since like 2012, when after the Olympics and stuff, and before that. So let's go back to 2015 when Jermell picked up. That's going to be 8 years ago. He has 3 total losses, and I can name them all. You've got Tony Harrison, you've got Canelo Alvarez, and you've got Terrence Crawford as losses. Now, if you want to be petty and you want to count it, you could say that you can also count the Marcus Brown loss. So that's going to be 4 losses and 1 draw to Brian Castano. The Castano draw was avenged with a knockout victory. The Harrison loss was avenged with a knockout victory. Now, I don't see that in the future for the Marcus Brown loss. You know, he got outclassed in his fight, and I don't see Jermell going back in there with Canelo Alvarez, and I don't see him winning if he does. Errol Spence is going to rematch Terrence Crawford, and while I got an idea how that's going to turn out, you know, just like I've mentioned in the previous video, I think Errol Spence had his worst night in the ring on July 29th, and Terrence Crawford had his best night, and that created such a big chasm between the two fighters that it makes it hard for you to fathom a rematch being close. But then again, let's say Terrence Crawford comes in and he just fights well. He does what he typically does, and maybe even looks past Errol Spence a little bit, and Errol locks in. He gets a proper training. He's not going to be rusty. He's going to lose the weight properly, and he comes in. This could be a much more competitive fight. I don't know if it changes the outcome, but if you make it a closer fight, all of a sudden you could have one punch that changes the complexion of the fight. You could have something that goes to the cards, and if it goes to the cards, that means that Errol has been markedly better, and then there's a potential for split decision, draw, majority decision the other way, whatever the case may be. So not saying that there's going to be a change of outcome, but it's a possibility. So when you think about these things, and then you start to think about Derrick James' role, and let's talk about the 2 most recent fights and the losses. Jermell Charlo, for example. Many believe he shouldn't have been in the fight, and I thought it might have been a good fight, but I thought Jermell had a good chance of putting weight on properly. But after seeing him at the weigh-in, and he didn't look muscular, he just looked bigger. He obviously had a hard time getting up to 168, and it showed when it was time to go toe-to-toe with Canelo, who's been at the weight for several years, since as far back as at least 2020-21. So he just didn't have the power, and then I think he questioned his punch resistance to a big puncher that's already been at that division, and it was almost a foregone conclusion by the second or third round that he would not win. Errol Spence, on the other hand, man, this one's tough because, you know, my bias is obviously going to show through here, because this is, you know, my preferred fighter. That's my guy. You know, I've been following him since the Olympics, so I hope for the best for him. But I think that going into another fight with Terrence Crawford, there's some major things that need to significantly improve, and I just don't think that the time will avail for that. Now, if he was given a year, I could see him getting better at some things where he can get in the ring with other fighters, fine-tune those things, and then go back in there with Crawford. But if he's got to see him in December, January, I just don't think there's enough time to fix the fundamental flaws that are going to cause him problems against a guy like Crawford, unless Crawford comes in on not his best game and overlooks Spence because he's looking down the road at bigger fights. These aren't things that Derrick James can fix. He can't fix Jermell Charlo getting bigger, stronger. He can't fix that. He can give him the best strategy. Charlo's got to believe that he's big enough and strong enough to get in there and stand toe to toe with Canelo and execute the game plan. You could yell at a fighter all day, it's not going to happen. Errol Spence, there probably were some strategic tweaks that maybe Derrick James could have made, but the gap between the two fighters, and if you factor in something like maybe Errol didn't lose the weight right, I was confident that he would, but maybe he didn't. So if he didn't, he's not going to be able to execute whatever game plan you put in place because he's not at 100%. But let's say he did lose the weight properly. That's the best version of him you're going to get. There was nothing that he could have done to beat Terrence Crawford that day. And probably if that's the best version of him, there's nothing he can do to beat him in the future. So you can't lay that blame at Derrick James' feet. So when we start to put the pieces of the puzzle together, let's throw in one more. Frank Martin had a pretty rough night against Artem Harutyunyan. And he had Artem beat early, and he came off the gas and started counterpunching. And then when he got implored to let your hands go and actually fucking fight, he beat Artem's ass for the last 4 to 5 rounds of the fight and even got a knockdown out of the deal. So the strategy was perfect. It was the execution. And if you talk about, okay, well, the fighters aren't listening, it's not that the fighters aren't listening. It's sometimes when you're in the midst of the fight, when you get in between those ropes, what your trainer's telling you to do versus what you actually do become two separate things. And it's like you step outside of yourself and you begin to do whatever flows in the moment versus what the game plan is. It happens in football, it happens in basketball, it happens in sport, that athletes step away from the script and they go off script and do their own thing, and it's not always favorable. And then I also look at, sometimes you just go in and you're at a disadvantage. Errol Spence went in at a disadvantage. Clearly, Terrence Crawford proved that he had better skills. There's an obvious disadvantage. Jermell Charlo went in at a disadvantage. While I think he's more skilled than Canelo, I don't think he had the necessary tools to execute those skills, such as bigger and stronger, the durability, and then the power to make Canelo respect him. So think about, in the football reference, USC went in and they probably figured, oh, Oregon just beat the hell out of Colorado, we're going to do the same thing. And for a couple quarters it happened, and then all of a sudden Colorado came back and it wasn't as easy as they thought. They had the game plan to beat them by 40, but they ended up winning by 7. So what does that tell you? Sometimes even with the best game plan, when the other person is coming in with their own plan to execute, you may not get the result that you bargained for, no matter what you plan for. And I think that's what happened in both fights where they lost. And then even in the Artem fight for Frank Martin, now we got Ryan Garcia coming up. We've seen AJ get 2 wins under Derrick James this year. Let's see what Ryan Garcia is going to do with this newfound training and his new protected chin and better jab and stuff like that. So this has been T for the Mic Check Podcast. Drop your comments down below this video and let me know what you think. Until the next time, I'm out. Peace.